Well, now let's turn to our panel for this evening. And our panel for this evening is going to be talking about traction. Why traction? A lot of people don't know much about traction. A lot of people haven't heard about traction. So I thought, well, we've done the different scales, N scale, S scale, O scale. Let's talk about traction and expose the world to the traction modeling that's available today, what its future may be, and what it's like to be a traction modeler. So we've got four great people on our panel tonight, and I really do appreciate all of them for taking their time. I'm going to introduce them one at a time, and as I introduce them, I'd like for them to tell us a little bit about themselves and how they got involved with traction modeling. So the first one I'd like to introduce is Martin Breckbill, MMR. You all have seen Martin build models on our show before, and Martin's a long-time traction modeler. So Martin, welcome. Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, I'm not so sure when I started becoming a traction modeler officially. That was more along the lines of it being thrust upon me. I always liked trolleys. I liked to ride them. Used to visit various museums and started building some kits, LaBelle kits, the venerable LaBelle kits, which by the way are still out there. But then decided I was going to go off and scratch build interesting cars, because I found all kinds of unusual looking cars in the traction universe, which I just thought were fun to try and build. So let's see, I've been writing the traction column for O-Scale Trains magazine since 2009. I guess that's where I became labeled as a traction modeler, because I made the mistake of agreeing to write it. Hence the having it thrust upon me. So I've written almost 80 columns on traction modeling in the last 13 years. And I don't know how many models I've built. There's nothing like a deadline and having a column to write to motivate you to build a model. So I tend to not build passenger equipment, more freight and maintenance of way related trolley and traction equipment. So that's about where I am on it. So,
well, Martin, appreciate you being here this evening, and stay with us. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Ed Minus. And Ed is a traction modeler. Ed, welcome. Tell us a little bit about you. I think you're muted, Ed.
So
there you are.
There you go.
okay. Well, I grew up in the Chicagoland area, and I rode the South Shore as a very, very small child, and I always really, really enjoyed it a great deal. And so I started getting interested in traction when I lived in the Pacific Northwest. And the reason that I got interested in it is I love passenger cars and passenger trains. My parents took me on a train to Colorado one time, and then, like I said, I rode the South Shore all the time, so it really got me enthused about passengers. But I never have lived in a house that had enough room for a big layout. But I still was very committed to passenger stuff. So I've been in and out of it for about 25 years. And the reason I say that is when I lived in the Pacific Northwest, there was very little traction modeling going on at all. And so I kind of tried to dabble around a little bit and build some O-scale traction cars, but had no one to mentor me. So I gave up and sold the whole thing. And then when I moved to Detroit, I found the DUR Club, which was really helpful, and my interest got rekindled.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much for being here this evening. Well, now let me introduce another person from the Detroit area, Fred Cosgrove. And I've known Fred for quite a while. And Fred also is a member of the DUR in Detroit. So Fred, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been into traction about as long as I can remember. I think I got into it because my grandparents did own a car, and to go anywhere, we took the bus. And usually if we went to Detroit, we took the bus only as far as 6 Mile Road, where we could catch a streetcar on downtown on Woodward Avenue. So I thought the streetcar was great. Of course, at the time we were riding them, they were all PCCs. So they take off from the light, they leave the traffic behind. So I thought they were great. Could never understand why they got rid of them. My grandma kept saying, well, they'll be back. They'll be back. Well, I kept expecting every year they'd be back, and they never came back. So kind of lost interest in the whole item of traction until the mid-70s, when they announced they were saving the last 2 work cars in Detroit, created the Michigan Transit Museum. So it turns out I bumped into a couple of the members. They invited me down to Shoemaker and St. Jean, where the cars were being stored. And we ran those cars back and forth on a couple of 100 feet of track using what is called a stinger. And of course, I got hooked on it. And what really sank the hook in my mouth, they offered to take me to Chicago. There, we caught the South Shore. I haven't been right since. So, you want to see a big smile on my face? Put me on a South Shore car going along. My smile goes from ear to ear then. So, and of course, I found out there was different traction cars in Chicago, the Owl cars, different models, different series. And my goodness, there's model kits available in that. So it just grew and grew. So I'm sorry, I declare myself official traction nut.
Thank you. Thanks, Fred. And next, I'd like to introduce you to somebody else that I've known for quite a while, Dylan Lambert. Dylan, tell us about your involvement a little bit with traction.
Well, right off the bat, I blame Martin. Basically, yeah, you're a bad influence. What can I say? So basically, I started in narrow gauge, and I still the main thing I do. And about a year and a half ago at this point, I would think it was the first Harrisburg show that we had after COVID in 21. Martin and I were talking about mechanisms, and he brought up the idea of traction mechanisms in power trucks. And he's like, there might be something there. So I'm like, can I do it? So I was staying with a friend of mine, Kevin, down there, who helps organize the show. So I sit down at the dining room table in his house that night. I'm punching up stuff in the computer. I'm playing with other things. And then I'm realizing, wait, I actually can do it. I already have 90% of what I need. It's basically designing the stuff to hold the mechanical components. I'm like, oh, I can do this. So over the course of the following year, I basically designed my own wheels, the tires I have for the first batch of power trucks I put out, which were for Corgi PCCs. At first, I wanted to look at a Brill 27E truck, but then I had trouble visualizing the drawings. So then when I call a friend of mine, Rob Brogel, down at the Connecticut Trolley Museum, who's the president down there. I've known him since before he was the president. I said, hey, what are the odds you have one there that I could at least, I don't know, steal a picture of? And then I tell him what I'm doing. He puts me in contact with Justin Chase. Justin calls me, and then it was basically off to the races because Justin helped fill in another bunch of blanks that I didn't have access to at that point. So first kits went out, I'd like to say about 6 months ago. I haven't done another batch yet. because of, I've basically been looking at, okay, how do we improve for the next batch? How can I make it better and easier, not just for the builder, because I basically tried to keep it screwdriver assembly as close as possible, because I don't have time to physically assemble every single power truck. But then also, how can I make it easier for me to build? Like, so I can send out more of them. What are things that we can apply? I can basically, to make it simple, robust, and cost effective, which was my biggest thing, is how do I make sure the average Joe Schmo can not only, they're happy with what they buy, but they're not breaking the bank either, because then they may want to come back and buy more, if I'm being perfectly honest. So that's been going well. They've been the power trucks have been tortured. And some of the feedback that's gone into that torture has actually gone into some improvements that I'm planning for the next batch: revised wheels, modifications to the power pickup, i.e. me designing a press to pre-bend the strips before I send them out. So then everything's all nice and uniform, stuff like that. And then what else can I do that's out there? Like, I've got a Corgi safety car sitting on my shelf that I designed a truck for. It's just waiting to be put together. For instance, because it was basically lengthen the power truck I already drew up by, I think it was like 10 millimeters or something like that. It was already really close. And then, of course, the frames on it. They're all 3D printed frames. A lot of people don't, and even I didn't realize at the time that 3D printing's got to the point where you could use it for a mechanism frame where it's actually holding everything where it needs to be reliably. That is impressive, because 5 years ago, the technology just wasn't there. So I'm basically trying to apply new technology to old problems. And again, it's Martin's fault.
Thanks so much, Bill. And it's nice to know that there's some manufacturers in the hobby that are trying to do some new technology, bring some new technology into to traction. Well, let me ask you this, guys. What is traction modeling? Is traction modeling building a traction layout? Or is traction modeling building something you might say is a bumper car that runs from one end to the other of a piece of track on a regular model railroad? What is traction modeling today?
All of those things very easily. I know people who are doing nothing but a traction layout, and I know some modelers who have a trolley or subway line that's a feature, really, that's running constantly on their and automatically on their layout, while the rest of the layout is, diesels and steam. It's something. It can be something different for different people. It's open for whatever you want to do. You can be, completely religious and dedicated to a specific traction modeling prototype, or it could be something that's just a component of your layout.
Well, I hear a lot of people talk about traction, but I'm a new modeler, or I'm thinking about traction, but I don't know much about it. So why should I become a traction modeler? I've heard some people say, well, I got involved with traction because of this, that, and the other thing. But what's the advantage to me? What makes traction modeling something that should draw me, that pulls me into becoming a traction modeler versus another kind of model railroad?
Wow.
Well, I think
it takes up
it's,
less space.
space.
Yeah.
I think that's number one key issue, the space, and the radius is so much smaller. You don't need a big area to run a trolley layout. And the other nice thing is you don't need a bunch of cars. All you need is one car, and that can be the whole layout. So, and you're allowed to get into freight operation. So it covers every base around.
So really, you can be a regular model railroader, but just be a trolley modeler.
Yeah. People always seem to have a perception of a trolley carrying people from point to point, while in fact traction encompasses every aspect of model railroading.
Gotcha. So what's the main drawback? I get involved in it, or I think I'm going to get involved with it, and then I start finding out more about it. What's the main drawback to keep me out of becoming a traction modeler?
The overhead.
Bingo.
That's usually the main deal. The thing is, though, if you go run subway cars, they're usually third rail, and you can fake that very well. So you still can have traction without overhead that way.
Are you
And-
challenging me to make working third rail shoes?
Absolutely. You're not done yet.
The sad part here is that would be simple to do. All you need is a phosphor bronze strip off the bottom of a shoe, because the third rail is going to hide most of your strip.
So
And then
you'll
you just have it bent up so it's in contact with the third rail.
So you'll have it next week.
I could probably have it in 5 minutes from the scraps sitting here, to be honest.
Even
Yeah,
better.
Assuming my brain doesn't fry by the end of tonight, but yeah.
So
we'll
I've
work
operated on a gentleman in the Ontario areas layout, which is an overhead with traction, and it was modeled after the mid 50s to early 60s, a line that ran between Lake Erie and I want to say Waterloo, Stratford area. And it was everything from passenger to freight. And he did an amazing job because it is such a different thing to operate a layout that is not, that does rely on that overhead. And anybody who comes and sees it, it's such a different thing for them that it just opens up a whole new interest for a lot of people as to what is this, why is this, how is this type thing. So I think it's an amazing thing, but the overhead is definitely something that is a very time consuming to get right. So
Well, I think the basic thing on the overhead is knowing how to handle it before you start hanging it. Basically, you hang it over the center of the straight track, you're doing fine.
Mm.
You get into the curves, you have to bring it in towards the inside of the radius to keep the pole in that lined up with the overhead. And the other thing is positioning of the frogs. And usually what I do is I run my longest car through and mark where the trolley comes off. And then I run my shortest car through, mark where it goes off, and then I split the difference. And that's where I put the frog. So it sounds terrible. It looks terribly hard, but you get going, it goes along real good. And the biggest thing is, just like anything, giving it a try.
Yeah, you got to jump in.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if I wanted to jump in, what scale would I jump in? I mean, is there something about traction modeling that dictates this is the scale you need to be in if you're really going to get involved with it?
Well,
No,
I think me and Martin would be biased to O scale for obvious reasons.
I mean,
Right.
I think we're all low scale modelers right here, more or less. But there's lots of, in fact, there's even more stuff available in HO than as per usual. It's all out there. It may take some work on some of it because it's not the newest stuff on the planet, but availability is pretty good on secondary market in both. Well, it certainly is. It's fine, HO. O scale is a little more challenging.
But there's really no there's no reason why any scale modeler can't be a traction modeler, is there?
Oh, no. There's nothing about the scale that precludes being a traction modeler. Okay, so I have no idea what's available in S scale,
Right.
or N, but it shouldn't stop you. I mean, anything you need, you can probably find and or build.
Mhm.
Well, and I got you. So where can I get information about traction?
Oh, wow.
Where can I get help? Where can I find out about the standards that I need to know in order to build traction, to build overhead, for example? Where do I go for help?
Well, one of the places for information is on the website is Trolleyville, which is a good one to go to. And they keep you informed on the latest product and what's happening in the traction scene and that. So that's a real good site. And then East Penn
Yep.
has some real good specs, both for HO and O scale. So you can pick those up. They're real good and they'll help you along. And of course, the best thing is to find a group that models traction, get with them, and they should be able to help you out really good, giving you the finer ways of getting around things. So everybody has their own technique for hanging overhead, but they all seem like they work.
What about the NMRA? Does the NMRA have standards for traction?
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay, so that would be another possible source to go to.
Yeah, they just don't go into the detailing of hanging the wire and that. They give you the specs, how high, what size, and all this. But far as the actual construction, you're better off with like East Penn or a modeling group.
Well, Fred, I think you're the one that mentioned a few minutes ago space. How much space do I need for a traction layout? And again, all of you all, I think, are O-scalers. How much space do I have to have for a O-scale traction layout compared to a regular O-scale layout?
Well, I was up in Milwaukee for the Train Fest this weekend, and I saw a O-scale operation in like a box almost, and it was like 18 inches square, and it had a siding.
Yep.
So it don't take much because O-scale car is able to handle a better radius than a HO car or N-scale car.
So we talk 9, 10 inches? What kind of radius you talking about?
Oh, it had to be only, gee, I would say maybe 6 inches.
Okay.
So yeah, and it ran around. I saw the car operating around in this box like.
Yeah.
And
The kitchen table size is very doable.
oh yeah.
It's very doable. And
Yeah.
my regular layout, which runs steam, it's an 11 by 16 room. That's also my traction layout. It's the same
Okay.
track. I just pull everything off and swap out everything.
Yeah.
Well, actually, it doesn't really matter because Cumberland Valley had a overhead wire branch. So I lie to myself and pretend.
Remember, you're the master of the railroad.
Yeah. Well, that was a weird overhead system. It was double wire offset from off the center.
Do I have to be a scratch builder to be a traction modeler? In other words, do I have to build most of the stuff?
If you want a particular road, a particular car, you may have to, because there's so many different varieties in the traction world of cars. Supposedly, the PCC was going to be the standard of the industry. And there's so many varieties in the PCC, each line wanted their own particular item to it. So it was
Yeah.
like, even though it was a standard.
Yeah.
You can't find a standard car.
Yeah, that does seem to be part of the problem. And there's
Mhm.
the diversity of rolling stock, uh, freight motors, passenger cars. It's enormous. That's actually one of the attractive aspects of traction
Mhm.
is the diversity is hard to imagine how many variations are possible. When I did that CERA freight trailer, the box trailer, the standard car, which has 16 versions, basic versions. You want to get into the specifics, it probably has 32 or 64. So much for the word standard. So yeah, you may end up, if you want specific cars, well, this is not unlike any other type of model railroading. If you really want a specific box car, odds are you're going to have to do something to modify an existing car to get there. We have to scratch build it entirely for traction? Maybe. I don't know what, I guess we're going to get to this is, depending on the scale, new products aren't really common. It's limits. But the nice, what's interesting though, to flip that around is 3D printing is opening up all kinds of possibilities and diversity of those cars that you can't get otherwise. You flip that the other way, of course, there's still $200 plus, well, 185 to 300, somewhere in that range. You're looking at a drive unit for what, another 150. Underbody, interior, exterior details. It starts to add up. It's 3D printing is not going to make it cheaper. It's merely going to make it available.
Right.
So that's not the shortcut to getting a lessen the pain of the wallet being pried open with a crowbar. It's still going to happen, and you're still going to have to do some work. But I've been watching the 3D printing and O scale of cars for the last, it's been 7 or 8 years now. It's been going on, and it keeps going and getting better. As the technology improves, the quality improves, the ability to get unique products improves. Less and less building. You may have to not do so much scratch building, but just redetailing. That may be a bigger source problem is where do you get detail parts?
That was going to be my next question. Are the detail parts out there for traction?
Well, there's Q-Car still in existence. I don't know for how much longer. And of course, then we can always rely on Dylan for everything else.
Yeah,
I'll throw him-
good.
I'm gonna-
I'm pretty good.
We're going to throw Dylan under the bus real fast.
Yeah. To be fair, I've seen Q Cars trucks for years. So of course I am in Massachusetts. So I've been to the Bay State Model Railroad Museum in Roslindale. I know some of the people there. Very nice group. And I've seen Quinton's trucks, and they're honestly pieces of excellent craftsmanship. So of course, no one lasts forever. There will come a day that I'm not around or I'm retired or whatever. I'm still young. I've got at least 60 years. So you make of that what you will. But it always comes down to how can we not only keep doing it, how can we do it better? So as an outgrowth on this, one of the things I've been fiddling with, which again, spare time lately has been fun. I've been working on another power truck, this one for a Doodlebug, right? Based off of the similar ideas and some of the principles from the PCC truck. Now, using a totally different gear set, way higher gear ratio. But even with the gear ratio I've got in the trucks now, I did the math. I'm like, okay, my stall force is like to stall this out is sitting around 18 foot-pounds of torque. So your average corgi is like 1 pound. So and already it's like, okay, so it works. We know it moves it, but what sort of abuse can it take? How can we make it better? What applications are you going to need a second truck for, or do you need another gear, or do you need another gear setup? one of the issues I've had, one, of course, outside of time, as Jim knows and likes joking, hey, are you in jail yet? A lot. I don't, a week doesn't go by that I don't hear that question. But it's also testing it, making sure it works right. And again, assembling it. I've got the parts here ready to go. I just got to make, for the Doodlebug, I got to make the shaft adapters because I need to make longer ones. So I got to make them out of 2 pieces. But otherwise, it's ready to go. And then once that's done, put it together, send it to the guy who I've been working on it with so he can torture it and see what sort of abuse it could take. Because same deal when I did the math there. Of course, once you throw in a 44-to-1 gear ratio, your stall torque, that what it will take to stop that truck, goes way up. And at the same time, you run into the factor of where do you get parts? I'm lucky that I have a source of motors that not only are small, but are powerful, and finding out where they came from. I'm just going to say this, guys with tattoo guns, I didn't realize that that size of a motor put out that much torque. And there were bigger ones that put out even more. So I'm trying to figure out where do I get those bigger ones, because then you could do that much more with the truck in that size of a package. But most of this came out of mechanisms. The question of mechanisms that us ON30 guys had, and Martin, of course, pointed out, traction guys have a similar question of how do you make it work? ON30 guys, which I've been ON30 for however many years now, I've lost track. For a long time, we were lucky that we could grab an HO scale mechanism and modify it, and it's pretty good. Traction guys, how many brass models have come in that were unpowered that are really nice looking?
Most of them.
Yeah, most of them that are really nice looking, but how do you power it? Because it was designed to either sit on a shelf or in a display case. I couldn't tell you how many times Justin and I have had that conversation when we've talked about traction and stuff. I mean, he's got models of most of the stuff in the Connecticut Trolley Museum collection because, hey, he volunteers there. And he's like, I'd want to be able to have a display one day to say, these are the models we have in our collection. So even if it's in a barn somewhere and nobody can see it, hey, this is what it looks like. This is what it is. And this is what it'll look like when we're done working on it, or when you see it out one day, which is a good idea. I like it. But it's also, again, how do you power it? Like you look at some of Q-Car stuff, and with some models, what sort of surgery do you have to do to get it to fit? Now, for that reliability, yes, but your average Joey bag of donuts, I'm just going to say, look at me on that one. Because how easy is it for someone who's never done it before to make those modifications to get it to fit? And then it sits right. So one of the things Justin pointed out with me is when he first did it, when he was trying to make the supports to mount the truck to, he noticed the one side it was off by like half a degree. And him being a perfectionist, he's like, I screwed that up. I ripped it all out and redid it. But how many people who have never done that look at that and are daunted by it? If you could do it in such a way where it's just a screw and a nut and you really don't have to do any surgery, it solves a lot of that problem for not just beginners, but people who've done it for years. And what does that do for that beginner? They were able to do that project, be successful with it, and then you can figure out down the road, okay, what else can I do? You develop confidence, you start thinking, gears start turning, and you're modeling. You need a place to start, and even the experts need something that's easy sometimes, because let's be honest, sometimes easy is the better way to do it. Just my 2 cents on it from the perspective of someone designing mechanisms.
Dylan, that's why people like you are so vital, in my opinion, for the future of the hobby. Because you're exactly right. There's too many people that have no idea how to take and convert some of these things to where they will operate good. Let me go back and talk about overhead wire a minute.
Wow.
It's not just hanging wire. But you gotta get the wire. You gotta figure out how to make the poles or buy the poles. You got how far apart they have to. All of these kind of details it just seems to me it's kind of daunting for somebody that's never done it before to hang wire. I mean, is that your experience?
Well, I can certainly speak for myself. I think it's very daunting, and I would agree with you. But you know, I mean, you know, I've talked with Fred, I've talked with Martin, I've talked with Dylan, you know, and so all these people are helpful, and I think that's what you have to kind of do is meet other people that know what's going on and pick their brain a bit. You know, I mean, like I said, I was into it in Seattle, and then I abandoned it because I couldn't find anybody to answer any questions, and nobody was doing it. So I think it is daunting, but I think it's worth it. I've found so much pleasure in learning. I think that's one of the biggest things that I've enjoyed is looking at the history, learning what's going on, and trying it, you know, and yeah, I don't expect to succeed right off the bat in anything that I'm doing. So, you know, it's a learning process.
I think a lot of the supplies you need for it are actually available too.
Mhm.
I don't think it's a challenge as to the materials, wire, all the little castings and bits and bobs and poles. A lot of that's available. As far as I know, all of it is. So I don't, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I think it's available.
Mhm,
Jason's Brass Poles
mhm.
sells a lot of these parts. Brian Weissman.
Yeah.
So he
and
sells a
Jim
lot.
Rivers.
Well, I don't know that he's still in business.
Yeah,
He is? Okay.
yeah. He was
Okay.
at the West Penn meet.
Okay. So the next, you know, you can find a lot of this stuff.
Mhm.
It's out there. It's actually pretty available. Now,
Okay.
and I think getting together with other people who have gone before you to learn how to do what appears to be tricky to you. And so they will reveal to you, no, you're just holding it upside down and you need to put the soldering iron here as opposed to there. All of a sudden the light bulb goes on and you know, oh, this is a lot easier than I thought it was. So, you know, but it's one of those things, it's you have to find the community. And you
Yeah,
know,
I would agree with that. And there's a Facebook page, for example, that's pretty active in traction modeling. And yeah, I think it is. I mean, to be honest, I think it's difficult, but I also think it's worth it. You know, I mean, I think, you know, once you kind of get your network of people and get your network of who supplies what, yeah, it's going to be more difficult than going down to your hobby store and buying a train and you know, some section of track and stuff. But personally, I think it's worth it because I like learning new things, you know.
Well, one of the things that is troubling is that, like the club in Detroit, that is in effect going out of business. I agree with you that that's necessary to be able to find a community or find people that have done it, that know how to do it to help you. But if the clubs that are in existence today can't stay in business, that to me is a really serious situation for trolleys.
well,
I would agree with you.
I think it's a problem for all aspects of auto railroad. It's not just trolleys. I mean, you know, the Baltimore Club lost their lease and had to relocate. I mean, you know, this happens. If you don't own your space, the odds are you're not going to be there eventually.
Yeah. I got it.
And you worry about overhead wire. Well, you know, you had to find somebody to teach you how to hand lay track. You know, you need to be taught how to do everything. You know, this all doesn't just magically leap out of the back of your brain and land on the layout in front of you as a creation. So there's usually people along the way that say, yeah, you got to do this, because if you don't, you're going to have a problem. And and how do you know that? Because I got taught to avoid the problem 20 years before you. Some of this stuff just gets handed down. Some of it's very basic and fundamental. Because hand laying track hasn't changed within my lifetime, and probably 50 years before. Hanging overhead wire. It's maybe you got better brass castings to solder to and better looking poles, but the technique and the idea and the concepts haven't really changed.
It's a little bit like restoring an old car, say I was to go out and buy a Stanley steamer. I mean, where are the people that are restoring Stanley steamers? Well, they're few and far between, but but if you're committed to it, then part of the journey, in my opinion, is learning about it and finding the people that know what they're doing,
Which is part of the fun. I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
And generally, they're more than willing to share their knowledge.
Mhm.
yeah. Who is promoting traction hobbies right now? I mean, is there an organization? Is there a group? What promotion is traction as part of a model railroading community? Who's promoting it?
Well, I think Martin is with the Little Scale magazine, for one thing.
Well, yeah, I'll admit to that. And in fact, before I took over the column, the owner, publisher at the time, I had sent out an email to a couple of us. He wanted to discontinue 3 or 4 columns from the magazine, and I very strongly told him, don't discontinue traction,
Traction.
because there is no other in-print publication that has a regular feature of traction. It simply doesn't exist elsewhere. All the other traction magazines have dried up and blown away.
Right.
So once a month, once every issue, you're going to get a page or 3 in O-scale trains. Okay, so that's limited to O-scale, but it's nothing I do is at scale specific in that column.
Well, and I'll be honest, the first thing I turn to when I get my O-scale magazine is the traction page. So
Yeah.
That's embarrassing. Okay.
well, I like the magazine, but that is my favorite column. So
Okay. Well, I hope to not disappoint in the future. How's that? You set a high bar for me to.
well, I was trying to figure out how I could get the installments that you've done in the past.
We'll talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
There are ways to do that. But yeah, there's not a lot of in-print traction. It sparingly shows up in all the other model railroading literature.
Yeah.
I would say the East Penn Club does a great job of promoting it with their was it every 3 years they meet? Something
Every
like-
2.
Every 2?
Every
Yeah,
2.
up in and generally it's been up in Allentown, Pennsylvania for the last couple of times.
I'll be there again. Yeah.
Okay. I haven't been to it for a while, but you see it scattered about, but there's no, as far as I know, there's no real organization with a mission statement to promote it.
Yeah, I got you.
So
So let me ask you this: what's the future? Where look down the road 5 years or so. Where is traction modeling going?
Well, I think
I'm really
Ed had
glad
something
you
else.
asked, because I was just thinking about this, and I'm thinking, excuse me, Martin, but
Oh, go ahead.
I wonder if it's going to really come back with a vengeance. And the reason I say that may be really far-fetched, but you look at the lines that, the inner city lines that are being developed.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think in the future we're going to see more of it. Whether it's overhead, I don't know, but I think you're going to see more commuter type interurban cars. And so to me, yeah, we could look at it and say it's kind of bleak, but on the other hand, I'm not sure that it is. I mean, there may be a lot of people that really get excited about it, as we move into the more mass transit.
Yeah,
That's a
Yeah.
good point.
yeah. Well, listen, this has been interesting and I appreciate everybody's comments. Anybody have any final words they'd like to make about traction?
I think like with everything right now, traction, narrow gauge, O scale, HO, whatever we want to look at, what's really changing is how we make things. When the average, when a, you know, and when someone like me can design a mechanism, sell a bunch of them, and actually be successful with it to the point where it's like, okay, it's worth keep doing it. But we're not talking on scales of, say, Bachman or Atlas, where they buy 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 at a time. Then that just means that we're going to, there is opportunity. Not you need, if you can learn how to make a mechanism, the biggest thing with that mechanism is not just motors and gears, is your interaction proper? Like, is your center distance, are you doing the right center distance? So a lot of the material I've dealt with, nylon, I love it because it's durable. It doesn't warp unless you take a blowtorch to it, at which point it melts. But a lot of things melt when you take a blowtorch to it. You have technology now that is at a point where when I started, tossing around the idea of I want to make ON30 kits, almost 5 years ago now, that I didn't have back then. Especially at a point where it's cost effective. At the same time, if you could draw it on a computer and your production, in essence, takes up the space of a flash drive that you plug into a device, the potential that just not only does it make it easier to produce, it makes it easier to, it just makes the whole process easier. Production, assembly, everything. Because what happens if you need a spare part? Well, you don't need to have rows upon rows of shelves with spare parts sitting on them. You could have your fittings, and then if you need something spare, you can make it relatively easily, relatively cheaply, and relatively quickly. Like, what's your spin up time? Like, what's my spin up time to do a 3D printed part? To order it from the people who do my prints for me, the nylon stuff specifically. I press a button after I've already drawn it. And I could do that time and time and time again. And then it shows up to me to the spec that I designed it to. No need, no sprues, no nothing. And it does what's expected of it.
I think that's the way the hobby is go is 3D printing. And we'll be able basically to order what kind of a car we want. And I think actually the hobby will be better for it. I know it will. And I'm sure model railroading will be heading that way as well.
Think about the variety that it gives us.
Yes.
Think about the variety the 3D printing gives us.
Yep.
What's something I've heard tossed around in narrow gauge circle? McKean cars.
Oh, yeah.
The wedge front.
Right.
The wedge front doodle bug in essence. Well, who made a model of a McKean car for one? Not many people did, and really any scales, because they were a McKean is historically relevant.
Precision Scale did it.
Right, but outside of precision scale.
Ken Kidder.
Right, but not outside of Kidder and precision, not many people did it, right?
How about the 3D printed one in my hand?
Exactly, and I think I know who did that. That's wait, the back of that's cut off. So whose is that?
It's 3 pieces because
so that's someone else who did theirs. But then that brings you to another point. When brass used to be the standard for high detail, whereas today I can print something with detail pretty much approaching brass quality. Yeah, brass still has a role to play, and you can't beat metal as far as durability and longevity. But from a perspective of if you want your average Joe to have a really nice model that's cost effective, 3D printing is getting to the point that eventually I could print something like a coach eventually, and you could sell it as a kit for cost comparable to say Ready to Run. And it's, again, screw and glue, like the old All Nation kits, whether it be the NW2s, the F units, the 10-wheelers or the Atlantics, if you want to get into it. Think about it. Those were screwdriver assembly and a little bit of super glue and then your paint.
Yep.
That's essentially what we can get back to. And the reality here is the opportunity is there. And of course, with how many people from, say, my generation, or even people who are a little bit older than me now, that get computer design and can just crank it out, you realize how much we can actually make that hasn't been made before. You want that one-off New York, Westchester, and Boston, whatever the commuter line that ran out of Boston that was taken up in the 30s. It was an all-electric line. They had these funky looking, almost looked like Stillwell coaches. I think they were actually based off those, but these weird steel arch window coaches. As multiple units, you can make those. You want to really get creative. If you want to make that weird Delaware and Hudson super experimental 280 compound high pressure whatever, because they fiddled around with that a lot. Well, if you have the drawings and you have the CAD file, you could do it. And you could do it a lot easier than it would be to build it from scratch or try and find someone who built one, because it's one of those things that's esoteric and good luck seeing it. You look at Traction, double-ended PCCs. Those were rare birds, and I can think of maybe one or two double-ended PCC models. What Martin's holding up there, which that looks like that's the parlor car that's up in Seashore, isn't it?
This is the wind splitter kit that All Nation sells. It's 3D printed.
Ooh, I missed that altogether.
Now, I haven't gotten it assembled and reviewed in the magazine yet.
But it makes it so much easier to do it cost effectively and easy to assemble.
Yeah. The only issue with that kit, of course, is you get a body to put together, but okay.
No power truck.
Well, no. And no underbody details and no interior details and no exterior details. So you're still on the hook for all that stuff. So there's your market niche to dive into.
Well, I may or may
which,
not have some interior seat designs that I can just start cranking out in bulk.
Speaking
You guys should see my computer. I've just got like designs that I've had in the can for over a year now that I just haven't had time to really prototype yet.
Speaking of which, where's that drive for my coal motor?
That's right.
Yeah, that's right. I got to remind you.
We were trying to work on the wheelbase on that, weren't we? That's Martin. Feel free to reach for the computer and hit me, because I've been busier than I know what to do with.
That's a rabbit hole we don't need to go down.
I know. That's why I pushed him into it.
I got to thank all of you so much for coming here tonight. I think we've learned a lot about what traction modeling is all about from you, and I can't thank you enough for sharing your information with us.
It's fun.
Absolutely, it is.
It is.
I have more fun with it than I do with just about everything else, because the creativity aspect of it is just open ended.
I would agree with that.
It's a real thrill to hang the wire and run the first trolley through it and have the pole stay on the wire. It is a really great thrill. So I've been a traction modeler for a lot of years, and what you're saying just it drives home to me why I got into it and why I love it so much. But thank you so much again, guys. I really do appreciate all your help tonight.